At a noisy party, my ex-girlfriend's gaze lingered on the ring that glittered on my ring finger, and a disdainful smile touched her lips. She didn't miss the opportunity to hurt me further by now suggesting that I invite my wife on a date if I was so sure of my choice. I just answered her with a cold smile, trying to hide the inner tension, while she continued to mockingly watch my reaction. We found ourselves in the same room at a high school reunion celebrating my 30th high school graduation, an event that should have been a celebration but turned into a trial for me. Shang Xinqi was surrounded by people, laughing and looking absolutely happy, while I felt completely broken, trying to hide in the farthest corner of the room. But as soon as I looked up, our gazes met. She noticed me even there. At that moment, I was momentarily speechless. Her face seemed eerily familiar, like a ghostly echo of the girl who had once disappeared from my life forever. This combination of strangeness and familiarity was disconcerting. Some people remain with us, like fragments of a frozen past, and now, after 8 years of long separations, we came face to face again. The weight of those memories fell on my shoulders like an unbearable burden, especially when she glanced back at the wedding ring, casually noting the changes in my life. There was triumph in her eyes. She asked me directly if I was really married, and I just remained silent, unable to utter a word in response to her poisonous curiosity. The classmates around me were still buzzing with memories, and in the thick of the conversation, I heard rumors that Shang Xinqi was planning to marry the son of an influential leader. I forced out a routine congratulation, trying not to show how deeply all this talk hurt me after long years of unspoken rivalry and past grievances. Someone from the crowd, without mincing words, blurted out loudly, turning to me, "Feng Yuan, if you hadn't run away back then, this enviable status would have been yours. Aren't you kicking yourself?" In the silence that followed, everyone present, as if on command, stared at me, waiting for my reaction to this inappropriate provocation. I gritted my teeth, suppressing the sadness that flared up, and put a fake smile on my face, remembering myself, the naive and reckless boy I was many years ago. "It's just a stupid joke," I muttered, lazily swirling my wine glass and trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. When the curious gazes finally focused on someone else, I allowed myself to smile wryly, even though inside I was seething with bitterness and unwanted memories. She continued to be sarcastic, mockingly asking what exactly it was about my taste that attracted me, and I just silently suppressed my embarrassment, not knowing how to get out of this situation with dignity. After all, it was me who left her many years ago, putting a fat end to our relationship. At the time, I justified it by saying that she was simply not my type, hoping that this would be a good enough reason to break up. But the truth was different. Even after years, she rarely came to me in dreams, and I sometimes began to believe that I had finally let go of the past, having finally chosen Shang Xinqi. Such is life. Everyone in the room seemed to be eagerly awaiting the denouement of this drama. Everyone peered at my face with greedy curiosity, trying to figure out, when did Feng Yuan manage to get married? Why had no one in our circle heard even a rumor about it? "And where is your chosen one?" she persisted, continuing her sarcasm. "None of us have ever seen her with you. Are you really trying to hide the fact that you've aged and lost your position, hiding behind a fictitious marriage?" I couldn't escape this cycle of questions, feeling a dull irritation boiling inside me. I clenched my fist so tightly that my nails dug painfully into my palm, leaving red marks. Physical pain was the only way to maintain any semblance of composure. I sighed heavily, trying not to show how exhausted I was by this interrogation. She constantly emphasized that my wife was somewhere abroad, pretending to believe it with irony. Everyone around her began whispering, feeling like outsiders at this celebration of life, because everyone in the class remembered very well how loudly and painfully we had once parted with Shang Xinqi. Back then, our separation seemed terrible. I remembered trying to come to my senses after that night in the dorm, and she hadn't even bothered to look in to see if I was alive. Now, having returned from abroad, she appeared to me as a symbol of my past, one I had never been able to fully break with. Her every word felt like a silent slap in the face, and the general attention to my person only strengthened the desire to run away anywhere, just to avoid remaining in this epicenter of gossip. At some point, I heard rumors that Shang Xinqi had bought out the company I worked for, and now, ironically, she was becoming my immediate supervisor. "You'll have to work hard to prove your worth," the cry echoed through the air and panic filled the room. People began fussing, offering me a toast to Mr. Shang's health, and I, completely bewildered, jumped up from my chair, unsure how to react to this role reversal. Taking a nervous sip of wine, I felt my face flush with shame and anger. I forced out the stock phrase, "Mr. Shang, I trust in your prudence and professionalism in our future work." Shang Zinki looked at me and laughed. It seemed like she'd been doing this her whole life. "Of course, Fang Yuan, after all, you and I have such deep personal grievances that working together would be quite interesting." She spoke the last word with a sharp, almost snake-like accent. I looked at her hair, caught in the dim light, and suddenly felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Completely confused, I rushed to the bathroom to wash my face, but splashing cold water on my face only caused my hand to hit the sink. My nerves had rendered me unconscious of my own body. I looked up at the mirror. A 30-year-old man was looking back at me, his eyes reflecting the full weight of his years. In the reflection, I saw a person who looked nothing like the hopeful 20-year-old I had been. I hadn't understood why breakup songs seemed so confusing, but now I realized, all this time, I'd only been trying to survive in my own labyrinth. The muffled laughter of my former classmates drifted from the adjacent restroom. "Who even knows if he's really married?" whispers came from outside. "He's already 30 and he has no family, no children. It all seems like a cheap show." They continued to discuss my wife, claiming that she had never seen the sun, which was just another attempt to sting me by making my life seem fake. "They say he bought a house with a mortgage and drives an old Audi," I heard someone gloating. "Poor guy, trying to look successful, but we know the truth." This woman standing in front of me was the embodiment of success to them, while I remained an ordinary loser who failed to live up to their high expectations after graduating from school. "Come on, he's always been like this," I heard someone say behind me. "There's nothing surprising about the people he surrounds himself with. Let business chew him up and spit him out, it'll be a lesson." And yet, when I came back out, I realized the old Fang Yuan who believed in sincerity and love no longer existed. That broken man, a survivor of his own sorrows, was finally a thing of the past, and now I had to play by new, cruel rules. I let out a bitter laugh looking at my reflection and quietly walked out of the bathroom. The same question kept pulsing in my head. Do I regret it? I answered myself almost instantly. No. In this life, you have to let go of what you can no longer hold on to, no matter how much it hurts inside. I never imagined that my words, once cast into the void, would resonate so strongly years later. He was always a star, captivating everyone's attention, both 10 years ago and now. His life was that picture-perfect picture from a glossy magazine, envied by everyone around him, considering it the epitome of success. At 18, I was the family's black sheep, the object of ridicule and pity. But by 30, I had radically changed my fate. Having become a highly skilled veterinarian specializing in rare sea turtles, I returned to my homeland, hoping for a new life. While my former classmates were fiercely fighting for a place in the sun, trying to build a career in the corporate jungle, Shang Zinki's parents had long ago determined the future for their daughter, plotting her path with surgical precision. I remembered how I couldn't even afford a tiny apartment in this concrete metropolis, and 500,000 yuan in my account seemed like the ultimate dream, which I clung to with all my might. While I was counting every penny, Shang Zinki had already cemented her status as a young and influential entrepreneur. Her world consisted of luxurious villas and multi-million-dollar deals, opportunities beyond my reach. If 10 years ago Shang Zinki was just an unrealistic ideal for me, an unattainable girl with whom I was in love, now she has become the embodiment of what I have lost forever. I never expected to see her again because in all these years she never showed up at a class reunion, preferring to remain in her closed, elitist world. And now I stood here, shocked by the realization that the daughter of the head of the purchasing company, about whom everyone was whispering, was she. The realization that Shang Zinki was now my immediate supervisor hit me in the gut. I suddenly had a vivid picture of my rent bills, my car debt, and my entire life, which suddenly seemed utterly worthless. My hand instinctively reached into my pocket to pull out my resignation letter. I wanted to escape before disaster struck. Calm down, I scolded myself. Deal with the problems as they arise. 8 long years had passed since we broke up. Maybe she didn't care about me anymore. I opened my phone, frantically checking ticket prices, trying to find a way to disappear. An icy gust of wind blew in from the street through the doorway, making me shiver. I pulled my coat tighter around me, adjusting the collar. My heart pounded as I waited for my phone to load the data, but a lingering sense of doom grew within me. Suddenly, a blue Laotian Lies pulled up right at the entrance. The illusion of a peaceful evening was completely shattered. The driver got out, swung the back door open with ceremony, and I heard a voice. It was Gong Jing. "Mr. Shang, I just saw," and then she stepped out of the car. Her posture was perfect, her dress accentuated every curve, her high heels so loud that the sound of them echoed in my temples. She shone in the golden reflections of light, and I felt completely naked before her cold, assessing gaze, as if I had neither a penny nor dignity left in my soul. She looked me straight in the eyes, her tone was frighteningly calm, devoid of unnecessary emotion. "Let me give you a ride home." "I'm busy writing a work report," I snapped, trying not to let the tremor show in my voice. "And this place is remote, I can handle it myself. No thanks, though," I added a little quieter. "Are you afraid I'm still obsessed with our old feelings? It's been 8 years, Shang Zinki. I'm no longer the naive fool to cling to the past or play the role of a lover." She merely smiled, that same indifferent, model-like smile that once drove me crazy. She casually began to talk about the company's affairs, switching to a business-like tone so quickly it seemed as if the previous years had simply been erased from history. I felt like I was losing control of the situation and began to hastily justify myself, stumbling over my words. "Mr. Shan, I'm in a hurry. I'm the second project manager. Our department is currently divided into 3 divisions, and I need to be there." She listened, nodding slightly as I tried to look professional. "After the new year, we'll form a new team," she added in a cold tone. "For now, you're running the company, but remember, Fang Yuan, your successes are my successes now." Shang Zinki responded curtly, looking at me with barely perceptible skepticism. Her tone was impeccable. "The second team was created 3 years ago, and right now our Performance Enhancement Center is a leader in all respects." She paused briefly, allowing me to grasp the scope of her influence. "We plan to take over full control early next year." I froze, unsure how to react to this news. Finally, I managed to blurt out, "I'll prepare and send you a detailed report on the work done tomorrow morning." She remained silent, her gaze unreadable, as if she could see right through me. After a long, oppressive silence, she suddenly changed the subject. "The Health Culture Festival this year. Have you prepared the project yet?" All my plans, which I'd been working on for months, suddenly seemed pointless. She added, "I'm going to redistribute the company's staff. Considering we were bought out by a public corporation, it makes sense. What does Manager Fang think about this?" The news of the company's acquisition caused a strange reaction in the office. Some saw it as a gold mine and an opportunity for rapid career advancement, while others were despondent. The excitement about the prospects for growth quickly evaporated, replaced by a clinging fear. Rumors of impending major personnel changes left many employees seriously fearful of being laid off. I tried to remain calm, answering in a rehearsed manner. "Any decision made by a manager is, of course, dictated by the interests of the company and aimed at its long-term development." She chuckled, realizing I was using corporate jargon to hide my unease. "We're here to achieve results on projects, right, Fang Yuan?" I could only nod, feeling her piercing gaze press down on me. Her dark hair seemed almost black in the twilight, and suddenly she smiled, softly, almost warmly. The gesture was so unusual that every word she spoke now sounded deceptively smooth. I was overcome by internal conflict, trying to suppress the overwhelming feelings. But looking at her, I realized we had both changed greatly. Shang Zinki had become much more mature, confident, and calculating than the girl from my past. She looked away, her eyes dimming for a moment, as if remembering something unpleasant. Her quiet, barely perceptible laugh echoed through the dreary atmosphere of the parking lot. "It seems you've changed a lot, Fang Yuan," she said, and I couldn't help but agree. Yes, I really have changed. I've learned to open my eyes to reality. I've learned to walk with my head held high, no longer hiding in the shadows. I've regained the confidence I so sorely lacked in my youth. I no longer feel as poor or inadequate as I did then. But that encounter awakened within me shadows of the past that I'd so diligently tried to forget. The melody playing in my head reminded me of how humiliating it was to be a humble lover, when I was ready to give everything for a fleeting glance from Shang Zinki. "I never knew my mother. They said that she gave birth to me in poverty and, unable to bear such a life, ran away, leaving my father and me. My father had no use for me. He handed me over to my grandmother and went on a rampage. He changed women one after another until he was mired in debt and ended up behind bars. The years in prison burned the naivety out of me forever, turning me into a person accustomed to the cold and loneliness. I spent my entire childhood surrounded by recycled waste and poverty, which my grandmother tried to transform into something useful. I was born in filth and raised in filth, while Shang Zinki's world was built of a completely different stuff. She was a distant, unattainable cloud to me, one I couldn't even touch. I clearly remember the day we first met. I was 16, and in her eyes I saw everything I could never have. Back then, I scavenged for scraps to survive. I wore worn-out open-toed shoes and a baggy, faded school uniform. I followed her like a faithful dog, timidly trying not to attract attention as she passed. Shang Zinki's mother, seeing my grandmother and I in poverty, couldn't contain her emotions and started screaming right in the yard, demanding that we immediately get out of her sight. But Shang Zinki was different. Upon seeing me, she asked, "Yunyuan, do you have any unwanted boxes or bottles? Help me collect them." She ran out of the house in a light white dress, her hair damp from the shower. At that moment, she seemed like a real heroine from a good cartoon, stepped off the screen into our dirty courtyard. She handed me an armful of cardboard boxes, and I froze in place, completely at a loss for words by her simplicity and kindness. I was so engrossed in my work that I didn't immediately realize how I looked next to her in her immaculate clothes. Shame burned my face. I blushed and muttered, "Thank you. Wait for me here." "I'll get some more, just wait," she shouted and ran back into the house. Her mother, meanwhile, was staring intently at the scar on my face, not hiding her disgust. But Shang Zinki returned, gently touched my hair and said, "Study hard, Fang Yuan. I promise your life will definitely change for the better." These words made me blush even more deeply, my heart pounding in my throat. Shang Zinki, however, was incredibly natural. She dumped a pile of paper and plastic in front of me, not caring about getting her hands dirty. That day, I was deeply moved, but at the same time, I felt a painful sense of embarrassment. It was then that I made a solemn vow to myself. I would move mountains, learn, and do everything I could to escape this poverty forever. I dreamed that by the time I was 30, I'd be living in a house as luxurious as hers. But reality always cruelly mocks our childhood dreams, revealing how foolish and naive we were. And now, sitting in her expensive car and looking through the panoramic glass at the magnificent starry sky, I realized the whole gulf between us. I finally understood the harsh truth of life. No matter how fast a train travels, it can never catch a plane. I'm 30, and this realization was a bitter epiphany. I compared myself to her. I drive a used Audi 6. She drives a luxury executive car. The difference in our living standards was so obvious that my thoughts of equality crumbled to dust. At 18, I was too naive to acknowledge the obvious. Everyone says all roads lead to Rome. What a lie. Some people were simply born in Rome, while others spend their entire lives trying to crawl to its outskirts. You might spend your entire life in the wretched suburbs of Rome without ever seeing its center. The driver slowed down and said politely, "Mr. Fan, we've arrived. Your home is here." I snapped out of my thoughts, looking at the familiar, dreary neighborhood. "Please go away," I quietly said to the driver, wanting to hide my humiliation as quickly as possible. But it was too late. She'd already noticed where I lived. I put on my professional smile and managed to say, "Thank you for the ride, Ms. Shan." A heavy, sticky tension hung in the air. Shang Zinki looked disappointed to see the conditions I was living in. I was shocked. A lump formed in my chest, and I didn't know how to justify myself or what I could even say in such a situation. I was about to leave when I suddenly heard her voice. I opened the door slightly, and an icy winter wind blew in. She quietly asked, "Fang Yuan, how have you lived these 8 years?" Her voice sounded distant and cold, echoing the gusts of the night wind. I don't know why, but that simple question, "How are you?" pierced me right through, destroying all my efforts to appear successful and calm. That brief moment nearly cost me the fragile balance I'd spent years building. I felt a lump rise in my throat, and my eyes began to sting with unbidden tears. I clenched my teeth to keep from giving myself away with any sound or trembling. "Everything's fine," I said dryly, trying to sound as indifferent as possible. I opened the car door, stepped out onto the cold sidewalk, and barely waited for it to slam shut before taking a deep, ragged breath. Shang Zinki hadn't left. I turned around, meeting her gaze, and my heart betrayed me, skipping a beat before racing. Does he treat you well? She asked suddenly, and there was something in her soft voice that made me shudder. Yes, everything's fine, of course it's fine, I blurted out, nodding hastily. Trying to hide the panic rising inside me, I stepped back and nearly twisted my ankle, lost in my own thoughts and awkward movements. I walked away, trying to look confident, but my ears were still burning from her last question. Her voice, the one I'd only heard in my dreams before, rang in my ears, the same one I'd been so afraid to hear in reality. The pain in my ankle from my misstep began to throb, but I endured it. I slowly turned around to look once more at the one who had been my personal, sad word, the ghost that had haunted me for 8 long years. My thoughts were a jumbled mess. Her question, "How did you live these years?" hung in the air like a silent accusation, a reminder of the chasm I'd never been able to bridge. She sat in the dim light of the salon, illuminated only by the dim glow of a street lamp. Her eyes, deep and penetrating, looked at me with such a mixture of sadness and curiosity that I could hardly bear the contact. The corners of her lips twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly twisting into a sad smile, as if she knew the answers to all the questions I was so diligently trying to hide. "I'm getting married soon, so will you bless me?" My voice broke, but I forced a smile. I tried to appear light and carefree even though inside I was burning. "Of course, I wish you and your husband the greatest happiness," she added, her words like a knife. We wished each other happiness, but there were tears in her eyes, and the sound of her voice was drowned out by the noise of the night city, becoming more and more blurred and unreal. The moment I finally turned away, it became impossible to contain my emotions. The mask of cold professionalism cracked. For 8 years, I convinced myself I was over her. Why, now that we're so close, does it seem so wrong and inappropriate? If I'd known I'd give in so easily, I never would have stayed with her even for this minute. Was this a reward or a cruel punishment from fate? The love of our youth seemed such a brief flash that left only ashes in its wake. It's such a shame it all turned out this way. I still remember that day in high school when it all started. She walked onto the stage to introduce herself to the entire class, and I remember the room going silent. A lot of the boys started whispering, calling her incredibly beautiful, and I just froze. I glanced up at her furtively and forgot how to breathe. She had grown, even taller and more graceful than she had been 2 years ago. The teacher asked where she wanted to sit, and she glanced around the room and confidently chose the seat next to me. She was a woman of few words, and that's precisely why she became my deskmate. That day, I felt no joy, only a terrible, paralyzing nervous tension that made me blush to the roots of my hair. I was terrified she'd recognize me. I was the same ragamuffin who'd once collected trash outside her house. She said, "Hello, my name is Shang Zinki," and I, my head hunched, couldn't even muster a proper greeting. "My name is Fang Yuan," I finally muttered. She looked at me with a slight smile as if she could see right through me and replied, "Hello, neighbor." From then on, she constantly looked for an excuse to talk to me, asking about my hobbies, my dreams, things I didn't have back then. "Fang Yuan, what do you like to eat? Fang Yuan, what's your favorite song? Why do you study so hard?" These questions rained down on me every day as I sat at the next desk, hunched over. She repeated them endlessly, as if trying to break through my impenetrable armor of silence. Shang Zinki was incredible, polite, bright, and sociable. Although she could seem clingy, she possessed a genuine kindness that drew people in. It was precisely this that made her the object of both adoration and envy of the entire male class. Many boys literally begged me to deliver love letters to her. I felt pathetic. My inferiority was as obvious as her attractiveness. Every time I was asked to mediate, a storm of conflicting emotions erupted within me. Would I have dared to tell her anything at all? I felt like I was writing a letter to myself, knowing it would never reach its intended recipient. I hid notes addressed to her in my notebook, but they would forever remain just lines on paper. "I already have someone I like," she confessed one day, sighing. At that moment, it was like an electric shock struck me. "I wonder when I'll get the courage to tell him in a letter," she added, and her sad sigh echoed in my heart. Suddenly she turned to me. "Fang Yuan, if you were writing a love letter to someone you loved, what would you write?" I blushed to the roots of my hair, unable to hide my embarrassment. "It's too early for such thoughts, we're still in school," I muttered. She laughed loudly. "Then let's wait until school ends." Her laugh was so bright it was almost tangible. She lightly punched me on the shoulder. "Look, you're blushing again. Are you seeing someone?" I pretended to be engrossed in reading, but inside, everything was upside down. My heart was beating wildly, giving me away. No, of course I didn't have anyone. At least, I desperately tried to convince myself of this, staying up late at night and pondering her question. If I had decided to confess, what would I have written? These thoughts haunted me, forcing me to conjure up images of a love that seemed somehow unattainable. I understood that I would never be like the free, carefree birds who live only by their feelings. My life was armored with caution and pain. I wanted to be something fundamental to her, like a book on a shelf, reliable and eternal. But instead, I felt only the cold of an iron rod, the sharpness of a sword, and the weight of unfulfilled desires. I dreamed of my own love, independent, deep, like a flame that burns everything in its path, and at the same time tender, like the petal of a red flower. But the old me was crushed by the weight of poverty and the constant sense of inferiority engendered by my family. I was too poor and broken to lift my head and look the one I loved squarely in the eyes. I wore the same shoes for 2 years, a pair of folding shoes for 25 yuan. With my size 43 feet, I managed to squeeze into a size 42, a daily torture. To keep the shoes from falling apart completely, I filled the cracks with 502 glue. The surface of the shoes had yellowed with age, and I tried to hide it by thickly covering the yellowed areas with white powder. Every time I passed the store's display windows, I stopped. My gaze was drawn to a pair of ordinary sneakers. They cost 88 yuan. They weren't a famous brand, just good quality running shoes. 88 yuan, a sum that seemed astronomical to me at the time, but I dreamed of how easy it would be to walk in them. My grandmother suffered from constant foot pain, and every time I saw her struggle to move her feet, I clenched my fists. I promised myself I would work and save until I could buy her comfortable shoes so she wouldn't have to suffer with every step. I often watched my grandmother, with a gentle, tired smile, help the neighbors' children try on their new clothes, carefully lacing their shoes. My heart ached with longing. If I had a mother, would she have shown the same care for me? Unfortunately, this remained only a painful fantasy, for I never knew her warmth. The day of sports lesson arrived. The teacher had sternly demanded that everyone wear sneakers, but when he saw my shoes, worn out, tattered rags, his face twisted in displeasure. "Fang Yuan, I clearly told you to come in your sports uniform," he thundered across the class. "How are you even going to run in that?" the teacher asked mockingly. I stood there, feeling hundreds of classmates' eyes boring into my legs. I wanted to sink into the ground, but I forced myself to stand up straight, hiding my growing despair behind a mask of indifference. After class, as I was about to leave, hiding my awkwardness, a joyful voice came from behind me. "Surprise! Happy birthday, Fang Yuan!" Shang Xingqi smiled so widely that her snow-white teeth sparkled in the sun. Her ponytail, braided from dark hair, trembled amusingly as she looked at me with delight. The sunset's rays enveloped her, turning everything around her into a golden fairy tale. "Are you surprised? I accidentally saw your birth date on the documents when the teacher was leaving them on the table, and I just couldn't help but notice." Her eyes showed a sincere desire to please me, and I, caught off guard, did not know where to put my hands from the embarrassment that overwhelmed me. She pulled a gift box from behind her back and thrust it into my hands. "Don't worry, it was a buy one get one free deal, so it was practically free for me." She stuck her foot out in front of me, showing off a pair of identical, crisp white sneakers. With trembling fingers, I opened the box. Inside lay a pair of black sneakers of the same style. I knew the brand, shoes like that were sold only in the city's most exclusive stores and cost a fortune. "Thank you, but," I faltered, feeling a protest rising inside me. "These shoes are too expensive, I can't accept them," I blurted out, watching her smile fade for a moment at my refusal. "What happened? Why are you refusing?" A hint of panic crept into her voice. I tried to explain that it was too much of a gift for me, but the words stuck in my throat as I realized how poor I was compared to her world. She tried to convince me by showing me some coupon that supposedly made the purchase free, but I knew it was just a noble lie to save my pride. I tried to give the box back several times until she finally became genuinely worried. "Fang Yuan, we've been sitting at the same desk for so long, don't you consider me your friend?" Her words pierced my defenses. I fell silent, feeling my last attempts to protect myself from her kindness crumble. "Listen, let's do it this way," she said, changing her tone. "This won't be a gift, but a deal. I'm terrible at English. If I fail the exam, my parents will simply destroy me. Help me study, and that will be your payment for the shoes." I looked down, unable to resist the proposal. "Please, Fang Yuan, spare me at least an hour after school. I'll pay you 100 yuan per lesson if it makes things easier for you. She used my predicament to force me to accept the gift without feeling humiliated. I wanted to object, but she interrupted me imperiously, not giving me a chance to indulge in self-deprecation again. Thinking back to that moment, I realized that 2 years ago, before Shang Xingqi's family bought that very villa and moved up to the major league, her mother had behaved exactly the same way, with the same tact and kindness. She once held my head close to hers, promising that if I studied hard, life would definitely get better. Their entire family seemed imbued with some special humanity that seemed miraculous to me back then. They saw my deep-seated weakness, my dark envy and poverty, but they covered it up with their delicacy so I wouldn't feel like an outcast. That day, at sunset, Shang Xingqi seemed almost like a deity to me in this dim world. We walked down the road, me with a backpack full of heavy thoughts and she ahead of me, her gait light. "Fang Yuan," she suddenly called over her shoulder without turning around, "in the future when you become a great man, will you give me a pair of crystal slippers?" In the glow of the setting sun, she looked like the embodiment of my brightest, most unrealistic dream. She was a true princess, destined to wear glass slippers, and I was just a ragtag boy, not even entitled to dream of a royal title. Nevertheless, from that very day on, I began coming to her every evening to help her with her English, hour after hour, hoping that this knowledge would at least slightly narrow the distance between us. Shang Xingqi was a quick learner. Her academic performance was impressive, and her natural intelligence, combined with her broad outlook, allowed her to discuss topics I'd only read about in textbooks. In these conversations, I began to understand how the world of the rich works. While we were preparing for grueling entrance exams, children from wealthy families were already planning their departure abroad, to universities that I had never even dared to dream of. Her parents built a whole bridge to the future for her. Studying abroad cost hundreds of thousands a year. To me, that sum sounded like an abstract, cosmic figure divorced from reality. After all, that very year I almost dropped out of school simply because I didn't have a measly 1,200 yuan to pay off my tuition debt. When the school suddenly raised the third-grade high school tuition by 2,000 yuan, my family was horrified. Grandma ransacked her belongings, sold everything she could, but only scraped together 800. She sat in the dark all night, unable to sleep from grief and helplessness. Mustering all my courage, I went to my homeroom teacher and humbly asked for a deferment. He saw how desperate I was, and in trying to help, he made a fatal mistake. He announced a fundraiser in class, and classmates began bringing coins, some 10, some 20, some 50 yuan. I stood before them, watching as the change, the price of my shame, tumbled onto the wooden tray. Their looks, full of sympathy and pity, burned my skin like fire. I was obliged to bow to everyone who threw this money, and this personal dignity I tried to preserve crumbled to dust before everyone's eyes. Everything inside me was seething. It was impossible to describe in words. Anger at fate, at poverty, and at my own helplessness was overwhelming. That same evening, overcoming my trembling knees, I went up on stage, returned every coin I had collected back to its owner, and earned the rest of the amount myself, working myself to the bone, so that I would never have to beg for a handout again. When Shang Xingqi found out about this, she found me in the empty classroom. "Fang Yuan, why didn't you tell me you were having money problems?" she asked, her voice laced with anger and genuine pain. She literally drove me into a corner with her questions, and I didn't know how to explain to her what I felt. Her kindness seemed to me the most terrible threat to my fragile pride. I didn't want to be pitied, I wanted to be her equal, even though I knew it was an illusion. "I'll give you back every penny, thank you for everything," I snapped, not looking her in the eye, afraid that if I did, I'd break. To pay off my debt and support myself, I took a job at a fishing tackle factory. It was hard and dangerous work. The air in the workshop was thick with toxic fumes, making one dizzy. It was said that constantly inhaling these chemicals could cause lung cancer, but people clung to these jobs because they paid slightly more than elsewhere. I earned 80 yuan a day, risking my health every time for these pennies, just to quickly repay Shang Xingqi's debt and clear myself of the stigma of being in need. When I finally brought her the money, her face remained cold as ice. "Fang Yuan, do you really want this financial gulf between us?" she asked. I'd been preparing my speech for a long time, wanting to speak out, but everything pent up inside me turned to silence. After that incident with the donations, I became withdrawn, and many of the words I wanted to say to her simply died away, finding no outlet. Meanwhile, rumors began to circulate in class. Some whispered that Shang Xinqi liked me, others that she was just playing the charity worker. Whenever I was asked directly if I had feelings for her, a cold terror gripped me because the truth was too dangerous to let out. I was afraid to even allow myself to think that I liked her. I clearly understood that being with her meant condemning myself to the role of a shadow with no future. To prevent these feelings from destroying us both, I began deliberately building walls, distancing myself from her at every opportunity. Apparently, she sensed this and was furious at my cold indifference. One day, the situation reached a boiling point. The guy sitting behind me, whose heart was set on Shang Xinqi, dismissively tossed a coin right onto my desk. "Take this, it's a reward for your diligence, servant," he hissed, barely containing his rage. He hated me for the amount of time Shang Xinqi spent around me, and he decided to humiliate me in public. I sat there clenching my fists until my knuckles turned white, and he just chuckled, adding, "Why are you angry? It's just a joke, don't be so serious." But before I could say anything, a fire broke out. Shang Xinqi, who had remained silent until then, suddenly jumped up. Her eyes flashed. "You think this is a joke?" she shouted, and without thinking, she threw all his money right in his face. I was stunned. It was the first time I'd seen Shang Xinqi so furious. She was like a raging force of nature, defending me so fiercely that the entire class fell silent. Soon after this incident, her mother found me. She was still the embodiment of elegance and tenderness, although deep anxiety was visible in her eyes. "You're my daughter's deskmate, aren't you?" she asked softly. "Xinqi insists on staying here in China to study, even though she has a better future abroad. Do you know why?" She looked me straight in the eyes, waiting for an answer. I just shook my head, not daring to admit that deep down I'd guessed the reasons. "Young man, I beg you, convince her to leave." Her voice trembled with pleading. "Think of her future, don't let her ruin herself for something that can't be." I hesitated for a long time, tormented by my conscience, but finally decided to take this step. I found Shang Xinqi in the school garden. When I mentioned her departure, she looked at me with such surprise and bitter disappointment that it physically hurt. "Feng Yuan," she whispered, "do you really want me to leave?" I couldn't look up for a long time, my fists clenched in my pockets. Finally, I forced out, "Go, see the world for both of us." My words sounded pathetic, but I was trying to sound strong. I wanted us to be like two trees growing side by side, young and full of strength, even if our branches would never intertwine. "We will shine separately," I said, "and perhaps one day we will meet at the summit." She smiled bitterly. "Okay, I promise, but remember, Feng Yuan, we will always remain who we were. And you won't be able to hide from me anymore," she added, raising her head and looking straight into my soul. "Okay," I replied, feeling something shift inside. "Everything will be okay." From that day on, everything changed. Our relationship became closer and more open. She could talk to me for hours about trivial matters, about dreams, about life. I hardly spoke, preferring to listen to her voice, which became the most important sound in the world for me. At times, I caught myself staring at her too long and too openly, forgetting all propriety. When she noticed, I'd immediately lower my eyes in embarrassment, blush, and smile, giving myself away completely. One day, I heard rumors about her defiant nature and her classmates teasing about her behavior. Someone even tried to make fun of her for getting her uniform dirty, and I felt a protective instinct welling up within me. At school, noticing that she'd been in trouble, I, without thinking, ripped off my jacket and tied it around her waist to hide the stain on her skirt. When she realized what I'd done, her face flushed, and we both stood there embarrassed, not knowing what to do with our hands. I ran to the store in a panic to buy everything she needed, but standing in front of the sanitary pad display, I was completely at a loss. Dozens of brands, different packaging, I didn't understand a thing. Damn, which ones does she use? I clutched my hair in despair, feeling like a complete idiot, but wanting to do something to make her feel safe. I mumbled an apology, completely embarrassed, my face burning with shame. I'd heard somewhere that a hot drink might help with the pain, so instead of struggling with choosing toiletries, I dashed to the store and bought her a large cup of hot milky tea. When I handed her the tea, she was delighted. At the time, the brand was incredibly popular thanks to its J-Chew commercial. She sipped the drink happily, and her previously pale face began to flush with warmth. She looked at me with shining eyes. "Feng Yuan," she asked, tilting her head, "do you remember J-Chew's line in the commercial? 'You are my beautiful beauty. What do you think it means?'" She looked straight into my eyes, and I felt the air around us become almost tangible. I quietly replied that I didn't know, to which she merely laughed. Even a student with such a high score in the language doesn't know it, she teased. Of course, I understood the implication, but admitting it would have meant revealing what lay behind this innocent play on words. It means, I am milk tea so you can hold me in your hand, she whispered, and the words, heard under the sunset sky, resonated with a sharp pain and tenderness within me. She looked at me again. Fang Yuan, do you know what song I like best? She sang quietly, looking straight into my soul. In the past, there was a man who loved you for a very long time. Later, I kept finding emails from her with song lyrics and stories about her feelings. When she asked if I liked it, I always replied, "It's very good," hiding behind dry words the storm she stirred within me. She was full of energy and pride. "Today is just a regular rehearsal," she said. "I'll have a chance to show my true strength when the time comes." The time before the entrance exams was dwindling, and every day felt like our last. The hour of separation was inexorably approaching. At the graduation party, she was dazzling in her dress. Sitting down at the piano, she began to play that very same love story, and the music filled the hall with the sadness of farewell. "There was a man in the past who loved you for a long time, but the wind blew us apart," she sang. "Finally, I can love you one more day." The words seemed prophetic. A story always ends with a farewell. But she chose her own way, to turn the ending into laughter and light-hearted words, as if parting were just a change of scenery, not the end of the world. The hall exploded with applause, shouts, a sea of emotions, and amidst this noise I felt how our shared life was crumbling into 1,000 tiny fragments. She admitted she was afraid I'd forget her in the future, so she suggested adding her name and birthday to my password. "That way I'll always be a part of your life," she said with naive hope. From then on, that password became sacred to me. I used it on all my accounts, and she changed hers to the same one. It was our little secret, connecting us with invisible threads of code. The secret of my absence from the final party was simple. Participation cost 100 yuan. For my classmates, it was pocket money, but for me, it was a fortune I couldn't afford. I didn't want her to see me that evening devastated and sad. I had just returned from a shift at the electronics factory, covered in grease and fatigue. The tuition was prohibitive, and I couldn't afford the luxury of celebrating. When she told me she was leaving in a few days, I was silent for a long time. Everything inside me screamed with pain, but I couldn't utter a word. She simply looked at me, understanding everything without me having to explain. She smiled, sadly, helplessly. "Fang Yuan, you cannot walk your path without knowing that I will always be by your side," she said. I muttered an apology for my inability to be what she needed, but she only gently touched my head. "It's okay, opportunities will come in the future," she said. "You're so smart, you're sure to become king of the world." She always carefully guarded my fragile self-esteem, never allowing me to become completely disheartened. I carried a pendant with Ali in my pocket, which was dear to her like a talisman. Every night I took it out and ran my fingers over it, taking those precious moments to feel at least a little of her presence before plunging into cold loneliness. I spent weeks toiling over this little project, pouring everything I had into it. But when it was finished, I stood there in indecision. It seemed too cheap, too simple and crude to be worth the attention of a girl like her. But I still decided to do it. "Don't pay attention, it's very ordinary, I made it myself," I muttered, blushing with shame and hiding my eyes. She accepted it, and her reaction caught me off guard. She looked genuinely shocked. "This is magnificent," she whispered, clutching the piece to her chest. "It's unique, the only one in the world, and I'll treasure it like the apple of my eye." I never told her the most important thing. The pendant with Ali, which I'd kept for myself, was the other half of the pair. It was my secret. She slowly opened her arms and quietly said, "Hold on, Fang Yuan." There was so much warmth in the gesture that it took my breath away. She smelled of sunlight, that warm August day I remembered down to the last detail. She touched my ear with her hand and whispered, "Everything will be all right, trust me." Those words became my anchor for years to come. But life took us to opposite ends of the earth, throwing us into different worlds. We found ourselves at opposite poles, and I often thought, if the story had ended there on this high note, perhaps everything would have been much simpler. How sweet it would have been to remain friends without uttering those words of love that would have burned us to ashes if we had given them free rein. We stood on the brink, afraid to take a step. We simply hugged just before parting, putting into that embrace everything we couldn't express in words. In that moment, there was no future, no debt, no social status, just the two of us and that moment. The memories were meant to remain fond. When, years later in my 30s, I met Shang Zinki again, she announced her wedding. I imagined myself proudly handing her a large red envelope, feigning complete calm. "I wish you happiness, Shang Zinki. Thank you for once taking care of someone like me," was what I wanted to say, putting on a mask of indifference. Of course, it was just a joke. I couldn't afford a big red envelope. I chuckled bitterly to myself. Old classmate, I really did like you back then. But now it didn't matter anymore. I pretended to be happy, trying to get used to this new reality, but inside I was screaming with pain. I couldn't bear the truth. Returning home, I gave in to my tears until my strength failed me. And the next morning, I put on my invisible mask again to emerge into the world where Fang Yuan is a successful man with everything under control. Stepping out of the elevator, I headed for the door I'd come to call home. But as soon as I turned the key, I froze. Right at the threshold, in the dim hallway, sat a man. "Why so late? Your father's been waiting for you for hours," a sharp voice rang out. Fang Zhihai, my biological father. A year ago, the police found me and told me he'd been released after serving his sentence. Since then, my existence has been a living nightmare. In textbooks, the word father was associated with a mountain, with support. But my father was merely a reminder that not all parents bestow love, some bring only destruction. I remembered him fragmentarily. Neighbors whispered that my mother had run away, unable to bear the poverty and his character, leaving me to my fate. He was almost never home, and when he did, it was only to bring a fresh dose of chaos to my already fragile life with my grandmother. One day, he broke into the house, pursued by creditors, and stole the last money that my grandmother had saved for my food, accusing me of stealing. Later, after committing a robbery, he injured a man and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. I naively hoped that those long years in prison would teach him something, that prison would change him, but I was sorely mistaken. I looked at him and realized with horror, there are people in whom darkness has eaten into their very bones. Over the years, I finally realized that this man would not change, he would not become better, he would simply continue to destroy everything he touched. This connection became an endless, suffocating knot. Even if I called the police every day, they were powerless. Technically, he remained my father, and the law gave him the right to torment me under the guise of blood relationship. He recently showed up with his stepmother, a woman who, like him, looked at me like a wallet. They demanded 300,000 yuan, supposedly so that my brother, whose existence I had no idea existed, could get settled in life. "Give me 300,000, he demanded with the impudence of a scoundrel. I looked at him and a cold rage boiled within me. "I won't pay," I replied, trying not to shout. "I don't have a cent for you." He hissed like a snake. "You owe me. I'm your father. I gave you life. If it weren't for my mother who helped you survive as a child." He twisted the truth so easily, as if it weren't grandma who was dragging us both with all her might. "You're rich now and I'm an old man. I need a son who will take care of me. Give me money and I'll disappear, I promise." That was the last thing I could believe. "I have no money and I won't give you another penny," I snapped. He grinned. "Fine, if so, I'm shameless and I don't care about pride. I'll stay here in your house whether you want it or not." He wanted to make my life a living hell, making me a laughingstock in front of the neighbors. He was like a pesky, stinking bug that was impossible to get rid of. Life seemed like such a confusing maze that at times I was on the verge of going crazy. To somehow block out reality, I put on earplugs and cuddled my only friend, a white cat. I found him 6 years ago on New Year's Day. He was tiny, emaciated, covered in ringworm and other illnesses, and I nursed him back to health for months. We were both broken, but we survived. Listening to his quiet, measured purr, I felt the poison that had been poisoning my day slowly recede. Sometimes I felt like he was trembling, echoing my inner fear. "Do you also wonder why we're so alone?" I'd ask him into the empty apartment. He was the only being to whom I didn't need to explain anything. When he finally recovered, I vowed that we would get through this. Despite the hard work and constant fatigue, I knew that no matter how late I returned, he would be waiting for me at the door, greeting me with his soft meow. In those moments when I lay down to sleep listening to his snores, I felt truly healed. He accompanied me through moves, through job changes, through the darkest times of my life. Together, we went from cheap cat food to high-quality canned food. Slowly, step by step, we built our own little world. Meanwhile, changes began at work. After the company came under new ownership, a rigorous personnel reform began. The first purges affected the post-mortem departments and junior management. Many people were instantly thrown out of work, and the office atmosphere became poisoned by suspicion. Whispering in the hallways, the company's new president was a young, dazzlingly beautiful woman. The office buzzed with gossip, turning every workday into a theatrical performance. "Have you heard? President Shang is a real beauty, but don't get your hopes up. Rumor has it she's already engaged to someone in the finance department," her colleagues spread the rumor. Someone recalled an interview with the previous manager who had mentioned that President Shang prefers tall and thin people. A frenzy broke out in the office. People went on diets and signed up for gyms, hoping to become the new boss's type. One of my old colleagues, squinting, asked me, "Feng Yuan, you were acquainted with President Shang before she went abroad, weren't you?" The room fell silent, and then a loud, mocking laugh erupted. "Are you delusional? Shang Xingqi and Feng Yuan, you must have just had too many dreams for lunch." They laughed, patting me on the shoulder, but I just remained silent, tapping my fingers on the table, feeling a quiet, cold fire flaring inside me. That day, as usual, I immersed myself in work, trying to ignore the caustic jibes of my colleagues. But suddenly, someone standing by the window screamed, pointing to a newspaper photograph lying on the desk. I glanced at it, and everything inside me froze. The photo was of Shang Xingqi, but people around me started whispering, "Look, it's the spitting image of that bride whose photo Feng Yuan once accidentally dropped." The photo was old, but the resemblance to the image I had stored in my memory was unnerving. Colleagues began comparing them out loud. "Look, this bride is so innocent and pure, while Mr. Shang is a cold and luxurious beauty. Maybe they are related, or sisters, separated in childhood." A complete chaos of speculation reigned in the office. "We need to check the photos again," they persisted. "What if President Shang is the missing heiress they've been searching for so many years?" I felt my head spinning from this absurd theory. In a panic, I reached for the phone I'd changed a long time ago. It contained no old contacts, no past. I was looking for an excuse to escape, to avoid listening to this nonsense, when suddenly the ringing sound made my insides freeze. I ran out of the office, clutching the ring I'd bought myself. I didn't have a soulmate, and this ring was just a false shield I wore to keep people from prying into my soul. I pretended to be married so they'd leave me alone with their unsolicited advice and profitable connections. It was a white lie, but now, as I ran down the hallway, it felt like the heaviest burden I could bear. The corporate world was dominated by the 9 offices system, endless audits and intrigue. I was constantly receiving ambiguous messages, and I used my ring as a shield. "Let's keep it simple," I told my colleagues. "I'm married, period." But they persisted, wanting to see my wife. I had to improvise, pretending she was abroad. The only photo on my phone I never deleted was a random shot of Shang Xingqi. I showed it when they pressured me into passing her off as the wife, and now it's become a trap. I was a pauper at heart, even though I had a decent job. "Manager Fan," the secretary suddenly shouted. "Get to reception immediately. There's a man there who claims to be your father and is making a scene." The phone was ringing with tension. I hung up and rushed downstairs, feeling the world around me crumble. The reception area was packed. Everyone had their phones out, filming the scene. My father sat sprawled on the floor in the center of this disgrace. He looked like a tramp. "My son, Feng Yuan," he yelled across the lobby. "I raised him, I gave my blood so he could study, and now he's become a big boss and has forgotten his own father." "I don't care that I'm his father," he continued, throwing mud at me. "He drinks expensive drinks and eats delicacies every day, and I'm starving. Is that how sons behave?" People around me started filming, their faces expressing disgust and pity, not for me, but for the poor old man. "Is Manager Feng really that heartless?" Whispers came from all sides. I stood there, paralyzed. My outward respectability was crumbling under the weight of his lies. Yes, I didn't want to know my own father, but how could I explain that to people who only see a picture? Even my colleagues' parents looked different. Department head Feng approached me, his face gray with irritation. "Xiaoyu, you're finally here," Feng hissed. "Look at what's going on. How did that guy even get in here? Do you realize what a blow this is to the company's image? Get this resolved immediately." People were making noise, filming, whispering. At that moment, my gaze met Feng Zhihai's. His cries of "high degree," his brazen, triumphant gaze, all of it suddenly took me back to that fateful high school sports lesson when I was humiliated in front of the whole world. History was repeating itself, and this time I didn't have the strength to escape. Memories of the days when I couldn't even afford decent sneakers flashed through my mind. I remember the searing shame of an 18-year-old standing in gym class in worn-out flip-flops, feeling the disdainful glances of classmates whose shoes cost more than my entire annual budget. I hoped this nightmare was a thing of the past, but even at 30, I found myself defenseless against it. The worst thing was seeing all this humiliation before the eyes of the one whose opinion mattered most to me. Would I forever remain that pathetic boy? Suddenly, the crowd's murmur died down. Shang Xinqi appeared, her commanding presence cutting through the air like a blade. The guards and secretaries instantly pushed aside their curious colleagues, and the crowd began to disperse like mist in the sun. Fang Zhihai, taken aback by this change, fell silent, blinking. But he wasn't about to back down. "Fang Yuan, you ungrateful creature, look at him, people. He abandoned his own father, who went to great lengths to educate him." He screamed this lie so every manager and colleague could hear it. I stood there, my fingers gripping the edge of the table, feeling them tremble. There was no paternal love in his eyes, only a mad desire to break me. I couldn't understand why he hated me so much, but I saw something different in Shang Xinqi's eyes. She looked at Fang Zhihai with such cold, piercing attention, as if she could see right through him. "Who are you?" Her voice cracked like a whip. Then she turned to the secretary. "Take this man to my office and call the lawyers. We'll sort out the legitimacy of his claims and what he's doing here." She looked at me, her gaze unreadable like fogged glass. "Don't go," she said quietly. "Wait for me outside." I remained in the hallway, listening to the door slam shut, hiding them both. I knew my father wouldn't rest until he got the money. He was ready to do anything. I thought, if she needs money to buy him off and save my career, I'm ready to give everything I have. I waited nervously at the entrance to the CEO's office. When she opened the door, I walked in, feeling the heat rush to my face. The carpet beneath my feet felt soft as cotton wool, and everything around me felt unreal. "Problem solved," she said briefly, without going into detail. I was stunned, but the usual bitterness was gone. "Thank you, Mr. Shang," I breathed out, barely finding the strength to speak. She narrowed her eyes at me. "Thank you? How exactly are you going to thank me, Manager Fang?" I froze. "For what? For salvaging the last of my dignity?" I smiled, but it was a pathetic smile. She paused, and the air grew tense. "How about you organize my wedding?" she suggested. I nearly choked. "I hope you won't let me down." I tried to object that I had no experience, but she simply waved me off. "It's just a wedding at the Health and Culture Festival. Hundreds of thousands of guests, budget, no problem, don't make a tragedy out of it. Besides, Manager Fang, who better than you knows how I work and what I want, I trust you with that." Her scarlet lips curled slightly into an ironic smile. The next day, I met her fiancé for the first time. He turned out to be a young, incredibly handsome man, the son of a famous foreign scholar. He exuded confidence and success. He was open and friendly, unlike the reserved Xinqi. "Hello, brother, my name is Zai Ye," he said, extending his hand to me first, smiling so sincerely that it made me uneasy. "Hello, Mr. Zai," I replied politely, keeping my voice steady. "I'm in charge of organizing your celebration with Mr. Shang." My voice sounded like someone else's. "Brother, please pour me a glass of water, okay?" Ce asked, while Xinqi watched us from the side. Even his sister seemed surprised by this sudden closeness to the organizer. "Yes, just a moment," I nodded, about to fulfill her request, when suddenly I heard the voice of her secretary Zhao. "Did you hear? Bring some water to your loved one." Ce turned around, and I stood there, feeling the last light slowly fading inside me. I stole a glance at Shang Xinqi, trying to hide the trembling in my hands, and then turned my gaze to her fiancé. "Mr. Zai," I said, trying to sound professionally cold, "what are your requirements for the ceremony?" "Could you elaborate? I need a concrete plan to begin preparations," I added. Ce just laughed, pointing at Shang Xinqi. "Me, no demands, all questions are for her." "How is this possible? A person can't help but have an opinion about their own wedding." I was silent for a few seconds, feeling irritation rising inside me. "Ms. Shan," I turned to her, "what are your wishes for the design?" Shang Xinqi's expression was grim, her face seemingly carved from stone. But as soon as she glanced at Ce, she replied with a barely perceptible, almost forced smile, "Let everything be awash in flowers, a huge number of flowers." "What about the music? What's the theme song?" I asked, jotting down every word in my notebook. She answered without hesitation, "J Chu's Love Sky. Manager, is that okay with you?" I froze. The song about heaven, it remembered. It remembered everything we discussed in those distant times when the world belonged only to the two of us, but now those memories were meant for someone else. I suppressed the growing pain, bowed, and quickly left the office so as not to give myself away. I threw myself into my work, trying to drown out my feelings with the bustle. "Okay," I said when she called me back to clarify the details. "I'll get everything ready. Is there anything else?" She merely smiled faintly, coldly, distantly, and citing an important meeting, left the office. I stood in the empty room when I suddenly felt someone's gaze on me. Jai, standing silently behind me, was watching me with frightening insight. "Brother Fang Yuan, let's go eat, I'm starving," he suddenly suggested, changing his tone to a friendly one. His expression was as if he knew a secret and was waiting for me to spill the beans. "Okay, Mr. Zai, what would you prefer?" To my surprise, he took me not to an expensive restaurant, but to a regular street stall selling spicy soup. "Mr. Zai, are you serious? You don't belong here," I muttered. "Brother, just wait for me, you'll like it," he snapped, already ordering his food. As I watched him eat, memories of the home I'd been dreaming about for the past 2 years came flooding back to me. A simple, cozy place where you didn't have to pretend. I'd often visited her home before, but seeing her fiancé in such a setting was surreal. She seemed so self-sufficient, so far removed from the street noise that always made me feel at home. "You don't know," Siyi said, noticing my gaze. "The food abroad is a complete disappointment. I've been dreaming about this soup for years. Zinky always forbade me from eating such nasty stuff, so I often sneaked it in." "Mr. Zai, do you really have no requirements for the wedding?" I couldn't resist asking the question that was burning inside me. "After all, this is your celebration." "Brother, we're business partners," he dismissed, a strange disdain in his voice. "Don't you like Shang Zinky?" I was taken aback. "Why should I like her? We're just colleagues." Siyi looked at me with a smirk. "I just thought you two were perfect for each other." I laughed awkwardly, feeling the blood drain from my face. "Shang Zinky is perfect in everything. Family, education, money. Who am I next to her?" "And you, do you love her?" he suddenly asked, looking me straight in the eyes. A spark flickered in his gaze that I couldn't decipher. "Don't joke like that," I replied. "I don't even dare look in that direction." He laughed, but there was no mockery in it. "Brother, you two knew each other before, right?" His words hit me in the gut. My heart sank. "How do you know?" Siyi remained silent, continuing to study my face closely. "A person's eyes never lie," he finally said quietly. "Even if you're silent, your eyes have already said everything." Siyi suddenly lowered his voice. "I'll tell you a secret. The person I love is hot-tempered. She can even hit me if she gets angry. I thought I had to be good enough for her to be around." I froze, stunned by his frankness. "But she chose someone else and married someone else," he continued, smiling carefree as if commenting on the weather. "In this adult world, love often became a mere formality, having nothing to do with the person you ultimately share your life with." "Can't you two be together? Can't you just get married?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. We belonged to different worlds, and in those worlds, feelings were often sacrificed to circumstances. My heart suddenly sank and my mood darkened completely. "Brother, stop being sad, let's go have a drink." Zai dragged me to one of the noisy bars where he was obviously a regular. We ordered a bottle of black peach liqueur, and he started drinking as if he were trying to drown his entire life in alcohol. He ordered 10 more drinks, his movements becoming more expansive, feeling the rhythm of the music like his own pulse. He waved his hand around the room, indicating the girls dancing nearby. "Brother, who do you like? Pick anyone, I'll pay the bill, I don't care." His eyes clouded over as he pointed to the 2 girls at the bar. "Come here and keep Fangji company." I declined, feeling uneasy. "No need, I'm not in the mood." Siyi continued drinking, and the alcohol, which had seemed tasteless to me, quickly went to his head. When I asked where he lived, he only mumbled incoherently that he was not home. I had no choice but to call Shang Zinky and ask her to pick up this drunk guy. Siyi tried to flirt with the girl, but she only pushed him away in disgust. I stood there, confused, unsure what to do, when suddenly a tall female figure appeared out of the darkness. Her gaze was icy, her aura so commanding that the conversations in the bar died down. She looked at Siyi with undisguised disdain. She walked confidently, gracefully, and then, noticing me, she suddenly turned around and smiled warmly. "I'm his sister. Thank you for looking after this idiot." "Take him home," she commanded, then nodded toward the very girls Siyi had called. "And take care of the guests, pay for their taxi." She was a true mistress of the situation. Brother, you're so cold you don't even want a drink with me, Ce muttered as he was led away. I stood there dumbfounded, unsure how to react to all this commotion when Shang Zinki suddenly appeared from the shadows. Her quiet laughter heard behind me made me flinch. In this half-drunk atmosphere, her presence felt like an electric shock. I panicked, not knowing what she saw or what she thought. Shang Zinki came closer, her long legs moving with frightening grace. She stood next to me, almost touching me, and her closeness was overwhelming. I realized that the woman wasn't Ce's sister at all. It was his ex-girlfriend. Shang Zinki peered into my face, her breathing heavy, and suddenly she raised her hand and slapped me. "Why can't we have a secret affair?" she whispered, her eyes challenging. "I heard you found a replacement for me, Fang Yuan. Do you like cheap women like this?" I tried to turn away, but she grabbed my chin forcefully. "Zhang Ping's back," she said. "And when did you manage to get a divorce, huh, Fang Yuan?" I clenched my teeth, unable to utter a word. She took my hand with a triumphant smile and pulled the ring off my ring finger, the very fake one I wore as a shield. "What are you doing, you pathetic creature?" she whispered, clutching my ring in her fist. "Why are you wearing this tattered robe of propriety if you're not married? Are you afraid my uncle Lan Wang will come for you? Foolish Fang Yuan, you still fear what's long since dead." "Of course not," I replied, feeling my insides tighten with the absurdity of the moment. How could she, the cold and rational Shang Zinki, commit such wild, absurd acts? Although, to be honest, I'd had plenty of such moments in my own life, everything that happened between us had long since ceased to defy logic. She suddenly pulled me toward her. Her kiss wasn't tender, but almost violent. She bit my lips roughly, as if trying to tear the last of my will from me. Her hair, spilling over her shoulders, seemed frighteningly scarlet in the dim light of the bar, like spilled blood. Her heart was beating wildly, and her eyes were burning with a feverish, unhealthy fire. As she kissed me, she began to cry tears of rage and helplessness. "Have you ever thought about me?" she whispered. "Even once? No, how could you just erase me from your life?" This question hit harder than a slap in the face. After all, during those long years of separation, she didn't just live in my thoughts, she became the sole inhabitant of my dreams. In the most vivid of them, which recurred again and again, I met 30-year-old Shang Zinki. In that dream, she was married to a man with golden hair, and they had adorable children, the fruit of their mixed blood. We would bump into each other by chance on a busy street corner, and time would stand still. Her child then asked, "Mom, who is this uncle? Why is he looking at you as if you've known each other for a long time?" Shang Zinki, without batting an eye, replied, "He's just an old classmate, don't pay him any attention." That phrase always left a bitter taste in my dream. Who was I to her? A classmate, that was all I could hope for in her perfect life. Now in reality, she looked at me with the same cold, piercing gaze. "Have I not been kind to you? Why are you so cruel to me, Fang Yuan?" Her voice trembled. "Why would I fall in love with someone else if my heart is still here?" I couldn't hold back the tears that were flowing of their own accord. She looked at me with bloodshot, red eyes. "Fang Yuan, why can't you just calm down? Why can't we just be happy?" I looked at 30-year-old Shang Zinki and heard two voices clashing within me. One whispered, "Don't be too frank if you want to preserve the last of your pride." Another, bolder voice urged him on, "Be braver, confess everything to her." But a third, crueler voice snapped, "Fang Yuan, wake up, you have no future with her. You will never be together in this life." "I'm sorry," I squeezed out, looking out the window where a cold rain was starting to fall. "I can't love you anymore." My words were drowned out by the noise of the city. The sunny skies of my dreams have become nothing more than dim patches of autumn foliage. Young love is a rose blooming high in the mountains, beautiful and unattainable, a symbol of what we couldn't hold on to, despite all our efforts. Now that we're 30, everything has changed. As they wrote in those clever books, when you're young, you fall in love with nothing, and when you grow up, you learn to give up everything you hold dear. It was our only chance for courage, our only moment of pure, wild happiness, which we so senselessly squandered in the struggle with our own pride. We were together, and then we broke up. There's no point in rewriting that story, trying to find meaning where there was none. We simply turned out to be similar, but catastrophically unsuitable for each other. After college, she moved away and our lives were separated by 12 time zones. I read her QQ messages, realizing that my day was her night. "Fang Yuan, you're 12 hours ahead of me," she often wrote. "First you look at the moon," she said, "and in 12 hours I will see it. Please tell her that I'm still here." She sent me reports on her new life as if I were her only diary. Fang Yuan, I went to Niagara Falls today. It's impressive, but without you, it feels like just water. I was walking near the Empire State Building today. You can see it from everywhere, she wrote, and in every word I heard a silent cry. Come, wait until you earn some money and then we'll meet on Fifth Avenue. We'll definitely meet. Fang Yuan, I went on a hot air balloon ride today, she wrote, and every word was filled with melancholy. It was so romantic, but I felt like something infinitely important was missing. At the time, I was living in survival mode, work, school, trying to cling to the future, and messages like these felt like echoes of another unattainable life. My nights consisted of free soup in the cafeteria after midnight and endless midnight shifts at the switchboard. The end of the month turned into a marathon of call processing where I literally forgot my own name. I lived in a tiny room where every hour cost 6 yuan, and my day ended only at 9 in the evening when I fell exhausted onto my bed. We existed in different worlds at two ends of the earth, each demanding complete dedication. I was certain we would remain pen pals until the very end, until one day this fragile balance was shattered by a brief phone call. In the dorm, one of my roommates, unaware that I was on the line, loudly asked, "Hey, Fang Yuan, I heard you like that girl Liu Ruyan. Is that true?" The words echoed down the line, reaching Shang Xingqi's ears. Fang Yuan, who's Liu Ruyan? Her voice changed, becoming cold and shrill. She's just a classmate, I tried to justify myself. She's not even in my social circle. Liu Ruyan was as poor as I was. We both struggled in school, both strove for knowledge despite our lack of money, and the only place our paths crossed was the cheap food counter in the cafeteria. She was the only person who understood what it was like to stand in line for free soup. We helped each other. I'd give her my seat. She'd cover for me during lectures when I was exhausted from work. "Do you like her?" Shang Xingqi's question sounded like a death sentence. "No, I don't," I answered honestly. "And me?" she suddenly asked. "Do you like me?" My heart skipped a beat. "A lot," I whispered. "No, not really," madly. "Then you want to try to win me over?" Her sudden confession knocked the wind out from under me. I spent the next day feeling like I was in a dream, and the next morning, to my complete shock, she appeared at the gates of my campus. "Confessions must be sincere face to face," she said, looking me straight in the eyes. "Do you want to be with me? I'm easy to get, Fang Yuan, just say you need me." "I'm your girlfriend," she said, and the sun seemed to focus only on her. "Say it." I gathered up the courage I'd been building up all these years. "I really like you." It was the only moment in my life when I cast aside all my fears and doubts. I took a step forward, and she joyfully threw herself into my arms as if she had been waiting for this her whole life. We wandered the darkest and most remote corners of campus, afraid that someone would disturb our solitude. I remember the first time I kissed her on the lips, tasting her breath, the taste of my own happiness. She was calm, but I saw the color spread across her cheeks. From that day on, our training regimen of love began, an attempt to build something real amid the ruins of poverty and ambition. Sometimes she acted like a capricious child. If I didn't respond to her messages for a long time, she would start bombarding my screen, driving me crazy. "Do you even understand why I'm angry?" she'd ask. I was forced to explain every action I took, every minute I spent at work or in the library. She admitted that she was angry only because she wanted me to calm her down, to prove that she was a priority to me. "Baby, forgive me," she laughed, seeing my confusion. "I'm getting old and boring, demanding so much attention." She always ridiculed my attempts to fight for her love, preferring peaceful, tender truces. She knew I didn't want expensive gifts. I didn't have the money for them anyway. So she taught me to choose what was truly important, gifts that held a piece of my heart, not a price tag. She was unpredictable. Whenever she had free time, she could fly to me just to spend a couple of hours together, erasing the distance between our worlds. We were inseparable, holding hands, wandering the streets, hugging and kissing, oblivious to everyone around us. I was happier than ever, and yet, deep down, a worm of doubt gnawed at me. How could a girl like her, bright, successful, on the threshold of a great future, have truly fallen in love with someone like me? My fears paralyzed me. I was afraid I wouldn't have the strength to provide her with a decent life, that I would become the very weight that would drag her down. I was afraid that she, accustomed to a different standard of living, would sooner or later realize her mistake. She often got angry at my indecision, not realizing that behind my indifference lay not a lack of feelings, but a fear of losing them. She thought I didn't love her enough, but the truth was, I loved her too much to let her be near me. That year, she noticed that my old shoes were in tatters. I tried to hide it, patching the soles, but nothing escaped her watchful gaze. For my birthday, she gave me a box. Inside was a pair of high-quality leather shoes from a foreign brand I'd never even heard of. She insisted they were inexpensive, but I saw the price tag and realized it was a pittance for her, while for me, it was enough to last me a month. I never got around to wearing them. They were too expensive, too beautiful for my impoverished reality. And then disaster struck. My grandmother fell and broke her hip. She needed emergency surgery. The hospital quoted a price, 3,200 yuan. For our family, it was a stratospheric figure, an unattainable dream. Grandma, lying in the hospital bed, whispered, "Yuan, yuan, don't waste money on an old woman. I have to go anyway." My heart broke at her words. I tried to smile, squeezing her dry hand in mine. "Grandma, don't talk nonsense. You'll live for many more years. You'll see my wedding. You'll see my great-grandchildren." I promised her that after graduation, I'd take her to the big city where we'd go to restaurants and stroll through parks. She'd stroke my head and whisper, "My yuan yuan is the best." I paced the room, unsure where to get the money. Finally, I plucked up the courage and called Shang Zinki. My voice trembled as I asked if she could lend me 3,200 yuan. I vowed to pay it all back with the next scholarship, but everything inside me was crumbling. Everything I'd built over the years, my independence, my pride, had to be sacrificed on the altar of a loved one's life. Shang Zinki didn't listen to my excuses. She transferred 10,000 yuan to me and asked curtly, "Is that enough? Do you need anything else?" I laughed through my tears, taking only the necessary 3,200. She reassured me, "Feng Yuan, you are my boyfriend, and in the future you will be my husband. Did you really think I would leave you in trouble? You need to earn money to support me in the future," she added with a slight smile. "So think of it as an investment. Take care of me to the last penny just as I take care of you now." "I know how proud you are," she said quietly, "but I can't let you suffer alone. Please accept this." I hung up and the tears I'd been holding back for days came pouring out. The next day, like an angel, she descended from heaven right into my backwater. She came to be with me in the hospital. She didn't just give me the money, she sat with me in the hallway, waiting for the operation to end, holding my hand tightly. Her presence was the only thing that kept me from going crazy. The operation was a success. Grandmother, waking up, smiled at Shang Zinki, seeing how tenderly she looked at me. "Now I can die in peace," she whispered. "There's someone to look after my boy." Shang Zinki retorted, "No, Grandma, you have no right to say that. You should live to see our wedding, to have grandchildren. You should laugh with us." We made plans, dreamed, and swore that we would live a long and happy life together. We so wanted Grandma to see it all with her own eyes, but life is not a book, and even the sincerest vows are sometimes shattered by the inevitability of the end. Grandma passed away suddenly without waiting for my success or accepting my blessing. It happened on a perfectly ordinary, unremarkable day, which forever divided my life into before and after. She collapsed right there on the street, returning from the market, clutching a bag of live shrimp for my dinner. The shrimp were still flailing in the plastic wrap when she lay on the cold asphalt, her breath caught in her throat, and her heart, the heart that had beaten only for me her whole life, was forever still. Doctors later said it was a hidden heart condition. They asked if I'd noticed any symptoms, but I remained silent, feeling completely helpless. I was blind, I couldn't see, I couldn't do anything to help. Why did she never tell me about her pain? Why was I such a useless grandson? She spent her whole life collecting scraps, saving every penny to raise me so I could study, and I couldn't even extend her days an extra year. Just 1 year, I begged the doctors, give me 1 year, I would finish university, start earning money, I would give her a dignified old age. The doctor just looked at me sadly, shook his head, and looked away. Reality hit me with cold cruelty. The funeral required money I didn't have. Morgue space cost 300 yuan a day, a hearse 600, and crematorium services over 1,000. The expenses seemed astronomical. I realized with horror that even the death of the most precious person in my life had become an unbearable financial burden. I couldn't afford to let her go with dignity. In desperation, I remembered a classmate with whom I'd once worked part-time at a restaurant. He'd called me and, upon learning of my predicament, whispered that he knew a way to make some quick money. "I work at a club," he said. "I just sing with the guests, keep the company going, and sometimes it brings in hundreds, even thousands of dollars a night. He promised to get me a job, but deep down I knew that the singing would require more than just my voice. I was hesitating, balancing on the edge, when suddenly Shang Xingqi's mother contacted me. She invited me to her home. I put on the only decent clothes I had, trying to look decent, although inside I felt deeply humiliated by my poverty. I put on the thing Xingqi had once given me, the very one imbued with memories I wanted to forget but couldn't. In real life, unlike in TV series, everything was much more prosaic and painful. His mother greeted me with the same soft, almost frightening tenderness. She led me inside. It was the first time I had stepped over the threshold of this luxurious villa, where every piece of furniture was worth more than my entire life. I always knew the Shang Xingqi family's living conditions were excellent, but the reality exceeded all my expectations. It was another world. The walls were covered with designer bags, one after the other. I knew the prices of some of them. The cost of one such bag could support an entire family for several years or buy an apartment in the countryside. I glanced at the bag Shang Xingqi usually carried when we walked. It seemed very expensive to me, and suddenly I realized, perhaps it was the cheapest item in her collection, deliberately chosen so as not to embarrass me with her luxury. Fang Yuan, Xingqi's mother began, I know you love each other, but do you realize she's constantly flying to China just for you, and your grades, they don't always keep up with you. I looked down, feeling myself flush with shame. Sorry, I whispered, I'm really nervous. Money, it's really hard. She interrupted, you're both still students. You need to focus on your studies, not on surviving. Xingqi is still a bachelor's student. She has a long way to go. And you're staying here in China, she continued, studying me carefully. She's always worried about you, even on the other side of the world. Her voice became even softer, almost sympathetic, and that only made it more terrifying. I heard, Fang Yuan, I know that the only person close to you, your grandmother, is still in the hospital. She knew everything. My life was an open book to her, which she read with cold curiosity. Grandma passed away suddenly, without waiting for my success or accepting my blessing. It happened on a perfectly ordinary, unremarkable day, one that forever divided my life into before and after. She collapsed right on the street as she was returning from the market, clutching a bag of live shrimp for my dinner. The shrimp were still flailing in their cellophane wrappings, and she was already lying on the cold asphalt, her breath caught, and her heart, the heart that had beaten only for me her whole life, was forever still. Doctors later said it was a latent heart condition. They asked if I'd noticed any symptoms, but I remained silent, feeling utterly helpless. Why had she never told me about her pain? Why had I been such a useless grandson? She'd spent her entire life scavenging, saving every penny to raise me, and I couldn't even extend her life an extra year. Just one more year, I pleaded with the doctors, but they only shook their heads. Reality crashed down on me cruelly. The funeral required money I didn't have. Morgue space, a hearse, crematorium services, all of it cost exorbitant sums. I realized with horror that even the death of the most precious person in my life had become an unbearable financial burden. A classmate of mine who worked at a club offered me a quick job, but I knew it was a path from which there was no return. At that moment, Shang Xingqi's mother contacted me. I donned the only decent clothes I had and headed to their villa. The first time I stepped through the door, I was speechless with luxury. The walls were lined with bags, each worth enough to support my family for years to come. Mother Xingqi greeted me with that same gentle, almost frightening tenderness that seemed worse than any hatred. Fang Yuan, I know you love each other, she said, looking me in the eye. But do you realize she's constantly flying to China for you, abandoning her studies? You know you're no match for her, right? She offered me money so I could focus on my future and get out of her daughter's life. I refused, but deep down I felt my remaining dignity crumbling to dust under the weight of their wealth. That day I left the villa, completely out of my mind. Later I discovered the shoes Xingqi had sent me were a limited edition. I sold them to pay for my grandmother's funeral. When Xingqi found out, she called me sobbing, unable to understand why I'd pushed her away and gone through that hell alone. I simply said, Xingqi, I don't have a home anymore. She flew in from overseas to be with me. We spent the night in a hotel trying to mend what was broken. She cried on my shoulder, promising that we would get married, that we would have a child and money. I looked at her and understood. Her love was not salvation. It was a catastrophe that would inevitably destroy her if she stayed with me. The next morning, she woke up so innocent and shy, asking when I fell in love with her. I answered evasively, afraid to admit it was many years ago. We dreamed again. She talked about the flowers in the wedding hall, the red dress, the song I would sing. I nodded, knowing there was no room for such dreams in my reality. Then her mother arrived. She was adamant. The family wanted Xingqi to study abroad. If you truly love her, can you bear her hard life with you? She asked. These words were a death sentence for me. I realized I was poor not only in my wallet, but also in my right to be happy with her. I started to back away. The day she left, I told her we were breaking up, that she would forget me and find someone else. She cried, begging me not to, but I was firm. I sent her on the plane, watching the person who was my entire universe disappear into a sea of people. A series of arguments followed. I ignored her calls until she came to my dorm, screaming at me for being a jerk. "I don't like you," I lied, looking her in the eye. I sat by the window all night, watching her while she waited beneath mine. That night, for the first time, I truly experienced heartbreak, when the air thickens and your breath catches in pain. The years passed. I became a lone hero who learned only one thing: how to make money. My life became an endless series of work shifts, alcohol, and attempts to forget. Adult loneliness turned out to be different from what I thought. It's simply an attempt to be content with existing. My cat, Chuyi, became the only creature waiting for me at home. One day, I met Shang Zinki's mother again. We were talking, and she mentioned that Zinki was still rebelling because of me. I repaid her the money I'd once borrowed and felt a strange sense of relief. 10 years later, I finally no longer owed them. I bought myself a pair of crystal slippers, simply as a symbol of releasing my princess into her own world. Shang Zinki found me. She looked at me, asking if we were pregnant then, that very year. I was silent, remembering the miscarriage, my darkest secret. She hugged me and tears wet my shoulders. We waited for each other for years, but time can't be turned back. I realized that an adult's heart is a coin not worth squandering. Even if you love, if there's no result, you must restrain yourself. "Forget it," I told her one last time. It wasn't a lack of love, it was the highest expression of it, not destroying the person you cherish so much. Fang Zhihai, my father, showed up at the door again, demanding money. I laughed and kicked him out, telling him we were no longer in a relationship. I was left alone in my empty apartment, where even the cat no longer waited for me as it once did. That night, I took a sleeping pill, wanting to simply sleep forever. In my daze, I heard someone singing me a song from the past. Did I wake up and see him, or was it just a dream? I'm sick of this past, I'm sick of this love. But even if we're no younger than we are today, I'll move forward. We'll become better wherever we are.